Good morning, friends. Welcome to OBEJournal 2018. Yes, we're still in that year, although as we approach November, it's looking, like it's coming to a close, and we'll venture on into 2019. Although in out-of-body travel, that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, does it? The movement of time is less than significant in that other world, and the farther you get away from our level of vibration on the physical plane, the less and less it means. As you explore your own projections of consciousness, you might find startlingly strange accelerations and reversals of time. Either you're moving into the future, however briefly, of this plane, of the potential future, or the past. Really, the only thing that's holding you back from that is your belief system that you cannot do that, which can be fairly deeply held, unconscious, something you're not particularly thinking about as you experiment with your own consciousness and see what can be discovered. But during these experiments, there'll be various surprises where you will find yourself transgressing semi or subconscious limitations that perhaps you didn't even know you had. And that is yet another benefit of this practice, is that you will discover various definitions and expectations and limitations that you didn't know you had, because they will manifest. The other night I had a memory of a fairly lucid dream of being a delivery person with a large package which I was giving to somebody. And since earlier in this incarnation I have actually had that as a job, it was an interesting sort of return. And the package turned out to be sort of a shoulder pack. You would strap, like a shoulder bag, and enabled one to fly. And the person was certainly pleased to receive this package, and it enabled them to fly. And looking back on it, even that very morning, I wasn't sure whether it was a leap into the future, the near future, when such little jetpacks might be available to us. And my first thought then was, I do hope they don't make as much noise as leaf blowers. Trying to imagine the kind of noise that they would make, and if they were using that kind of technology. And could you stand that level of noise flying about? Or would they be of some more subtle kind? Let's hope so. And all the other thought I had was that this was my brain taking a subtle experience and transforming it according to definitions and rules it understood. In which case I might be showing someone how to fly in the other world, someone who had perhaps passed without much knowledge, and in the translation of that experience into, this thing we call lucid dream, I had, my brain had added the sort of assumed technology that made such a thing possible. And I say that because in my practice, I've discovered many, many people that will come to me either through email or Skype or phone call, sometimes personal encounters, will tell me about dreams they've had for years where they're taking various friends, acquaintances, people they knew on for a ride in a car, and then the car takes off into the sky. And sometimes it's a bus, and sometimes it's a train. And I tell them, well, that's a retrieval. You're helping somebody move on, and your brain's providing the expected furniture to populate the experience. And this can help people because they've been having these dreams for years and not really quite knowing what it meant. But an examination of the literature, or talking to people with shared experiences, you will find that these sort of metaphors and imagery occur over and over. Any mode of earth transport where you're driving or taking people somewhere is usually a brain imposed set of imagery to describe a retrieval where you're moving someone along to the proper afterlife, instead of having them hang around like a confused ghost here. And I'm certain I've touched on this before. We're coming to 50 or more, well, more than 50 OBEJournal entries here. So it's quite possible I've touched on this before and forgotten. So forgive me on that one. And but I'm aware that a lot of you don't watch every one of these episodes. So I don't think it's a waste to go over certain details and aspects a second or third time. Another discovery you may make is that you are involved in certain activities or certain practices in the other world, as while you're alive here, that extend far beyond what you do on this level. And your astral being is often much more accomplished than you realize. And that is part of discovering the astral and exploring it. And I've known this for years. And I've long gone past the level of being shocked. Although, I did go through that change. Things happened to me that I made note of years ago and was too, shocked, embarrassed to put them into my books. And there's been a recurrence of one. And for example, those of you who have read More Adventures in Eternity will know that in my place in the astral, as the Monroe people like to say, my place in F-27. Traditional English cottage on the front, and a sort of an arm of a French chateau going out back that you can't see till you get there, which is reserved for musical performances. Oh, that's its main purpose anyway. I do describe that, but I left out any reference because I wasn't entirely convinced at the time to this music school that I found on another trip that had unusual architecture, but then again, a lot of structures in the astral plane have wildly inventive architecture that you could barely put together here because of the cost. This music school was built on a series of rolling hills, small rolling hills, but no attempt to flatten the earth like we would do here. You can use sections of forest and streams here, but the building will be on the edge of the forest on flattened land for, the usual reasons. But there, it was built on, kind of soil and tree roots and a lot of old trees, big old trees, whose tops of those trees went through the roof. And space was provided for them to do that, and you could walk through this place, as well as in meeting areas and practice rooms and performance spaces. There were, as you would see in a forest with large ancient trees, large roots coming out at the bottom, and people would be sitting on these roots practicing their instruments. And as I walked through this place on an early exploration, using the hemisync tapes, which at that time I was using a lot, people seemed to recognize me. Oh, hello, Gordon, they would say. And an inner voice told me that before I was born, as Gordon, this time, I had been one of a group of people that had put this music school together. And pretty shocked. Another time when I explored this, because I was amazed after the first time, like shocked beyond belief. And because in this physical incarnation, I'm a great lover of music. I'm a great collector of albums, a great audience member. But I'm not really a participating creative musician. And this really shocked me. And although, and this next little section shocked me, as I was approaching the building through this hilly forested area, as one does when one's projecting, I distinctly heard the sounds of some kind of a string quartet. And a voice told me that that was one of my compositions. It sounded vaguely like one of the string quartets by the contemporary English composer Gavin Bryars, who I may have been listening to at the time. And I sort of put it aside as that's what was happening. My brain was bringing this up. But I wasn't entirely convinced by my own sort of justification. And as I say, put it aside, didn't come into the book. I edited it out. And also some other references to famous musicians of this time period on Earth that had, either participated in or attended this music school before they were born. And I won't mention their names now, but famous people. And so it all seemed just a little too much. So I didn't put it in the book. And there's been occasional references in my lucid dreaming and out-of-body traveling to, meeting up with other musicians. And I'm going beyond what you've seen or heard in my spirit contacts with people like, David Bowie and Richard Wright, etc. There's been other things I haven't spoken of that suggest to me that I interact a lot with musicians on the astral plane. But this past week, and I tell you this story because it may plug into some unusual experiences you've had that you can't really explain, given your Earth life. I was at some kind of a music festival, and as I sat down, I spoke to a composer that was sitting in front of me, and by the name of David Bedford. And as I spoke to him, he said, "Oh, I'm not that David Bedford, I'm another David Bedford." And when I woke up in the morning, I thought, remembering the English composer who passed just in the last few years, David Bedford, who had excelled in many levels and had written some great pieces that I was very fond of, including his orchestrations of Mike Oldfield's first two compositions, Tubular Bells and Hergus Ridge, that you may not have heard of, but he did do orchestral versions of those pieces. And they were put out as records, but not as wholesomely embraced as Mike Oldfield's regular output. And, I knew he was a classical composer, and he played in Kevin Ayers' band, Kevin Ayers and the Whole World. He played keyboard. So he straddled a number of worlds. I tried to follow his career. So sitting down at this music festival, and he says, "Oh, I'm not that David. I'm another David Bedford." And I wasn't sure if it was a sort of a joke of his, or there were actually two David Bedfords. And I introduced myself to him as I was a composer, and I spoke about some works that I'd composed or put together, and one including Chopin transcribed for electric guitar, which I have no knowledge of here, not at all. And the very idea that I could transcribe a piece of music to me is shocking, to say the least. So I just mentioned that as yet another indication in the last week or 10 days that we lead quite different lives over there than we would suspect. Not all of us, some of us. So if you discover these things, allow them to roll over you, allow them to make their impression. Don't reject them out of hand. Because once we have attained a certain level of functioning consciousness on the astral plane, while we're alive on this plane, there's all sorts of things that we can do. And, I just give you those two snippets as examples. And of course, there's many more, particularly in More Adventures in Eternity. And there's some veiled references in the novel An American in Heaven. Which brings me to another point. I notice just in a couple of magazine articles, just in the last few days, there are now two television cable series featuring people in the afterlife. One is called The Good Place, and another one's called, I think, Forever. And I've seen little snippets of each one, little trailers, but nothing extensive. But I watch out for those. I'm quite intrigued that in one season, 2 of these have appeared. And naturally, I would love to have An American in Heaven turned into a miniseries. I think it would just be ideal. The Adventures of Melanie, the girl with a bad attitude and a big mouth, who dies in a car accident and goes to one of the astral plane college towns that are dotted throughout the astral plane for those young people who passed through, the usual accidents and overdoses and whatnot, and missed out on their adventures in their, college town when they finally leave home and get to have some fun. And so, all is not lost, even though the book was published years ago. And I'm certainly thinking positive thoughts about that. And I encourage you all to read it. It's a fun read, and covers, don't let the cover put you off. It covers a lot of ground in a more light-hearted, fictionalized manner that's covered in my first couple of books. And illustrates how a young woman with a bad attitude can still have lots of fun in heaven. And it delineates the life of many young people who pass through, accidents and illnesses and overdoses, let's say. And it's something that needs to be understood, I believe. It's just one more aspect of the astral plane. And I portray them as having lots of fun. And, basically a really good time. And their main troubling issue is coping with their grieving parents back on Earth. So those 2 series, I believe I've got them right. There's one's called Forever, but a rather, what sounds like a rather dull married couple continuing on their dull marriage in heaven. And The Good Place, which seems to be about people in the heaven worlds. I can't really gather much more than that. It seems to be, a lighthearted comedy for sure. And, but, portraying real people leading real lives in the afterlife, which I think for our culture is long overdue. It's time we explored this on many levels. And if the level turns out to be light-hearted comedy on television, then so be it. It needs to become part of the daily discourse. It needs to move beyond grieving and religious squabbling about who gets to go and who doesn't get to go. And I look forward to more of this, including American in Heaven becoming a series, absolutely. What else of interest has occurred, I'm thinking to myself, since we last spoke? There's a number of books, and I've got a couple of them right here. One called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. And another book by Tao Lin called Trip, Psychedelics, Alienation, and Change. And there's more. There's been a small flood of them in the last couple of years. And psychedelics as recreation and teaching tools and psychotherapeutic aids are experiencing a comeback, no question. You've perhaps read a few articles, and as I have, and either mushrooms, DMT, LSD, they're all coming back, and governments are opening themselves up to sanctioning experimentation either in hospitals or in hospices with depressed people or people with terminal conditions. And we'll be seeing more of this. We've been seeing plenty of it so far, but I think we'll be seeing more of it. And I came across a description of someone's experience in LSD, which reminded me of a dream that a friend had where I was the major participant. And let me see if I can find this. I wasn't planning on reading this, but I might as well. The book, as well as describing Michael Pollan's own experiences, is a history of psychedelic pioneers of the 60s and 70s, and the people who are behind this drive to reinvent and reestablish the study of psychedelics as useful tools in modifying consciousness. And of course now I can't find what I'm looking for, but it's in here somewhere. We're talking about a character called Bob Jesse. There are several people's lives and experiences spoken of in detail in this book. And I think I'm coming here. And I'll read the experience and talk about how this is so similar to a dream that a friend of mine had and communicated to me by email. This is the current psychedelic pioneer, Bob Jesse. I was lying on my back underneath a ficus tree, he recalls. I knew it was going to be a strong experience. And the point came when the little I still was just starting to slip away. The little I. I lost all awareness of being on the floor of an apartment in Baltimore. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. What opened up before me was, for lack of a better word, a space, but not our ordinary concept of space, just the pure awareness of a realm without form and void of content. And into that realm came a celestial entity, which was the emergence of the physical world. The emergence of the physical world. It was like the Big Bang, but without the boom or the blinding light. It was the birth of the physical universe. In one sense, it was dramatic, and maybe the most important thing that ever occurred in the history of the world. Yet it just sort of happened. I asked him where he was in all of this. I was a diffusely located observer. I was coextensive with this emergence. Here I let him know he was losing me. Long pause. I'm hesitating because the words are an awkward fit. Words seem too constraining. Ineffability is, of course, a hallmark of the mystical experience. The awareness transcends any particular sensory modality, he explained unhelpfully. Was it scary? There was no terror, only fascination and awe. Pause. Maybe a little fear. From here on, Jesse watched, or whatever you would like to call it, the birth of everything. In the unfolding of an epic sequence beginning with the appearance of cosmic dust, leading to the creation of the stars and then the solar systems, followed by the emergence of life, and from there the arrival of what we call humans. Then acquisition of language and the unfolding of awareness, all the way up to one's self here in this room, surrounded by my friends. I had come all the way back to right where I was. How much clock time had elapsed? I asked. I had no idea. What stands out most for me is the quality of the awareness experienced, something entirely distinct from what I've come to regard as Bob. How does this expanded awareness fit into the scope of things? To the extent I regard the experience as veridical, and about that I'm still not sure, it tells me that consciousness is primary to the physical universe. In fact, it precedes it. Did he now believe consciousness exists outside the brain? He's not certain. But to grow freely from being very sure that the opposite is true, that consciousness is the product of our grey matter, to be unsure is an immense shift. I asked him if he agreed with something I'd read the Dalai Lama had said, that the idea that brains create consciousness, an idea accepted without question by most scientists, is a metaphysical assumption, not a scientific fact. Bingo, Jesse said. And for someone with my orientation, agnostic, enamored of science, that changes everything. So, this dream that this friend recounted to me by email, 10, 15 years ago at least, was, she said that I showed her how the planet Earth was, you might say, born or produced out of nothing. And she said, you just sort of waved your hands in the air and all this stuff started to happen. And those were early days for me. I was a newbie. I was struggling along, learning things from other people like Bruce Moen, for example, Bob Monroe, and the sort of thing I describe early on in More Adventures in Eternity. And to have a friend say this was shocking, that some aspect of me would know all this and could use the magic sort of vibrational technologies of the astral plane to illuminate this sort of birth of a planet scenario for someone that needed to know it, that I would have that level of knowledge and ability. That was shocking. And I didn't know what to make of it. And I didn't put it in any of my books because it sounded like too wild a claim, just like the other things. So, I offer that as yet another example of strange, mysterious, revolutionary experiences that you may have on your journeys that will challenge the very notions of who you are and what you can do. I've heard, many other tales from other explorers over the years in a casual sort of email, telephone kind of way. I can't remember any of them right now, but let me just say they're not uncommon, and I urge you not to be overwhelmed with shock when they happen. Just observe and correlate and modify with your own thoughts. And having a few of these experiences, you may find that, and I've been mentioned this by a recent email correspondent, what a relief it is to come back to one's body and lead a normal daily life after a few experiences that would be challenging one's balance and stability and sanity. And the person that was communicating this to me was having experiences that were not exactly like the ones I've described, but powerful vibrational sort of reactions to certain meditations that were shocking to him, and took quite a time to absorb into his being and feel a stability of consciousness returning. And some of those experiences people will think of as raising the Kundalini. You'll be familiar with that phrase. And people have these Kundalini experiences that can be quite overwhelming. And whether these other ones are a product of that, I wouldn't care to make a definitive statement, but they are similar. I would suggest that Spirit never gives you an experience that you can't handle. Spirit guides are very conscious of that sort of thing, and will moderate as best they can the experiences you have, so that you're not overwhelmed. When you're doing retrieval work, for example, they'll start you off with fairly straightforward, easy ones, and progress you to more difficult, challenging ones. Yeah, I would say that you won't get any more than you can handle at any one time, even though you may think, oh man, this is too much, I can't handle this. Generally you can. Other items are probing my consciousness, seeking expression at this time, but some of them are quite politically charged, and it's probably best that I don't unfold them right now. A number of spirits will come to me, or sort of prod at the edge of my consciousness, because somehow they know that I can broadcast through this medium some of the states that they're experiencing, some of the thoughts that they're having, some of the emotions they're experiencing. And the one that I'm feeling right now is perhaps a little too politically charged for today. And we'll get back to it another time when the dust has settled. um, any reading of the daily newspaper can come across many scandalous tragedies that are politically charged. So we recognize that that goes on all the time. The state of the world, with its governments and intelligence agencies acting without impunity in the most repulsive fashion, morally repulsive fashion, never ceases to amaze me that they continue to do it and continue to get away with it. But, you know, karma is karma, and they will face that another time. If not any earthly justice, then certainly karma for their actions. And although I do think it would be better if they faced earthly justice as well. But I'm in no position to affect that. Anyway, we'll get back to this another time. And I thank you for your contribution, your consciousness, which you give freely to these videos. And I will return soon.